Freedom of speech versus hate speech. Where do we draw the line? Freedom of speech is a fundamental right enshrined in many democratic societies, protecting individuals' ability to express opinions, share ideas, and engage in discourse without fear of government repression. However, in recent years, the issue of hate speech has come to the forefront of debates around free expression. As societies become more diverse and interconnected, the question arises, where do we draw the line between freedom of speech and hate speech? The intersection of these two concepts presents a complex challenge. On one hand, freedom of speech is a cornerstone of democracy and individual rights. On the other, hate speech, often defined as speech that incites violence or discrimination against particular groups, can cause real harm. As such, it is important to explore both sides of the debate to understand where that line might be drawn and whether it can or should be drawn at all. The case for freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is universally recognized as a fundamental human right in democratic societies, protected by various constitutions and international agreements such as the First Amendment in the United States and Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The primary argument for absolute free speech is that it is essential for the functioning of a democratic society. Democracy depends on the free exchange of ideas, debate, and dissent. People must be able to speak freely to challenge authority, expose corruption, and advocate for social, political, or economic change. A core tenet of the freedom of speech argument is the belief that even controversial or unpopular ideas should be protected, as they can contribute to the marketplace of ideas. In this view, society benefits when individuals are allowed to express themselves freely, even if their views are offensive to some. The theory of marketplace of ideas suggests that the best way to combat harmful speech or misinformation is through more speech, rather than suppressing it. In this sense, free expression allows society to test ideas, find truth, and foster intellectual and social progress. Another important argument is that the state should not be the arbiter of what constitutes acceptable speech. Giving governments or authorities the power to censor speech opens the door to potential abuses of power, where individuals could be punished for expressing dissent or holding unpopular opinions. In this sense, allowing free speech without restrictions is seen as a safeguard against government overreach and authoritarianism. The case for regulating hate speech. While the case for free speech is compelling, it must be balanced with concerns about the potential harm caused by certain types of speech. Hate speech, which is typically defined as speech that incites violence, discrimination, or hostility against individuals or groups based on characteristics such as race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or gender, can have real-world consequences. It can fuel division, perpetuate stereotypes, and even lead to violence and hate crimes. Advocates for regulating hate speech argue that the harm it causes justifies restrictions on speech. Hate speech can dehumanize individuals, embolden extremists, and incite people to take violent action against targeted groups. For instance, rhetoric that demonizes a particular ethnic or religious group can contribute to an environment in which discrimination and violence are tolerated or even encouraged. This can lead to real-world consequences, such as physical attacks, systemic discrimination, and a climate of fear and hatred. In countries with histories of ethnic or religious conflict, such as Rwanda or Bosnia, hate speech has been shown to be a precursor to violence, genocide, and civil war. As such, proponents of hate speech regulation argue that by restricting harmful speech, societies can prevent the escalation of such tensions and protect marginalized communities from further harm. Moreover, many argue that speech is not simply a matter of individual expression, but it has social implications. In a multicultural society, speech that targets particular groups can undermine social cohesion, disrupt peaceful coexistence, and undermine the dignity and equality of vulnerable populations. Supporters of regulating hate speech often argue that the harm to social harmony and individual dignity outweighs the potential risks of censoring speech. Striking a balance. The gray area. The core challenge in this debate is finding a balance between freedom of speech and the need to protect individuals and groups from harm caused by hate speech. This balance is especially difficult in an era of social media, where speech is amplified and has a global reach. The question of where to draw the line between free expression and harmful speech is particularly pressing in digital spaces, where hate speech can spread rapidly and incite violence on a scale not previously seen. One of the most difficult aspects of this debate is defining what constitutes hate speech. In many jurisdictions, the term remains fluid and subject to interpretation. What one person considers hate speech may simply be a deeply offensive opinion to another. In this regard, establishing clear legal boundaries between what is permissible speech and what is hate speech can be a challenge. Some argue that the risk of overreach is too great, and that the subjectivity of defining hate speech opens the door to censorship that may stifle legitimate political discourse, satire, or unpopular ideas. Another complication arises in the context of free speech platforms such as social media. Social media companies often have to navigate the tension between maintaining an open space for free expression and protecting their users from harmful content. These platforms frequently come under scrutiny for their role in either allowing or moderating hate speech. Some believe that social media companies should be held accountable for the content posted on their sites, while others argue that platform owners should not be tasked with policing speech and should instead focus on promoting diverse viewpoints. Legal and ethical considerations. In terms of legal frameworks, different countries have different approaches to regulating hate speech. In the United States, the First Amendment protects a wide array of speech, including hate speech, unless it directly incites violence or leads to immediate harm. In contrast, European countries, such as Germany, have stricter laws against hate speech, with clear legal frameworks that ban speech that incites hatred or discrimination against certain groups. These contrasting approaches reflect different cultural values around the role of free speech in society and the level of protection granted to individuals and communities. The challenge lies in determining the point at which speech crosses the line from legitimate expression to harmful speech. Many argue that it's important for any legal or social restrictions on hate speech to be narrowly defined and carefully implemented, ensuring that they target speech that poses a direct threat to others and not simply unpopular or controversial opinions. Conclusion. The question of where to draw the line between freedom of speech and hate speech remains one of the most contentious issues in modern democratic societies. While freedom of speech is a cornerstone of democracy and individual liberty, it cannot be an absolute right in a world where speech can cause harm to individuals or destabilize society. Hate speech has the potential to incite violence, perpetuate discrimination, and threaten social harmony, which means that some restrictions on speech may be necessary. However, the challenge is finding a balance that ensures individuals can continue to express themselves freely without allowing harmful rhetoric to undermine the rights and dignity of others. Ultimately, the debate over freedom of speech versus hate speech is not one that has a simple, one-size-fits-all solution. It requires nuanced, thoughtful discussions that take into account the complex social, ethical, and legal implications of each position. Striking the right balance between protecting free expression and safeguarding the welfare of vulnerable individuals and groups is essential in maintaining both justice and a thriving democratic society.